Thank you, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. And to refer back to an opening question from today, it's better to go first so your talk doesn't become redundant and irrelevant, but that's okay. I will be repeating, obviously, a lot that's been already said today, but I think I really want to focus on a key element of this, and it came out a little bit in the Dean's talk from North Carolina. The idea that in a lot of our discussions, in my view of STEM, equality, and diversity, we seem to leave out the faculty in the classroom. And that has to be critical going forward. And some of it, I've been someone who I joke, I've been a STEM education groupie for the full 20+ years of my career, following physics education research and other STEM education research. And you have to ask the question, if in the sciences we've known active learning is a better way of teaching for at least 10 or 15 years now, maybe going on 20 years, how come it isn't ubiquitous and everywhere? So clearly there is a huge barrier to getting faculty to change what they view the classroom as and how they utilize the classroom. And that's kind of what I'd like to talk about a little bit today. And I'd like to start with the classic in our pipeline. There's two things about the leaky pipeline analogy that make me a little nervous. The first is, rightfully so, we need a lot of what I call external fixes or external changes. And we've talked about culture change and management change. And that's necessary and needed. And I think it works to some extent. But we've also heard a lot of talks about we went on 30 years of effort and a lot of funding and effectively no change. And I would like to suggest that part of the problem is we haven't asked if we have the right pipes. Okay? We've noticed they're leaking, and we worry about fixing the leaks, but we haven't asked, are the pipes correct? And I didn't put this in my slides, but an analogy I like to use, and I'll just use right at the beginning, and if nothing else, hopefully this will be one takeaway from the talk. I realize I usually talk in America where my analogy is a soccer analogy, but here I should probably make it a football analogy. If you have any experience in the US in youth sports, you know that everybody recognizes what a good soccer/football player is. It is a person who scores lots of goals, right? If your kid scores lots of goals as a parent, you expect them to be picked first and on the team and do great. The reality is, if I want to have a successful football team, I need strikers, midfielders, defenders, and goalies. So think about that for a moment. They're all soccer players, they're all football players. There are general skills or competencies, we talked earlier about competencies, that they must all have. But if I'm going to have a successful team, there's also a diverse set of abilities and competencies that I must bring to it. And if the only people in charge of the team are strikers, and they only pick people like themselves, you may score a lot of goals, but you're probably going to lose every game. And that is essentially the situation I feel we've created with the system that happens in the classroom. And so that analogy I hope will carry through. I am now going in my slides to use a more physicsy analogy. So we have an input state. That's our students. I apologize for generalizing them as a square box as an input state. We do something to them. That's the transfer function. And we get something out the other end. Okay, that's our output state. And one of the challenges with change is we have managed to make some very good scientists. They're just not particularly diverse. And they're basically, I don't know whether this is a value judgment or not. I won't name which position in the soccer team they are, but they're all kind of one position in the soccer team. And we often, when we approach people and ask them about changing that transfer function in the middle, which I argue is what we have to do, we run into the psychological problem that most faculty will say, you're asking me to lower my standards. That is the underlying core fear I think, that drives a lot of faculty. They experienced what they feel, in quotes, was a very rigorous process to get where they were. And they feel that everyone should experience an equally rigorous process. And they're worried that if you change the transfer function, something the quality, loosely defined, out of the other end will not be as good. Now, another way to give an example of this, because I think the interesting thing about this talk is I don't feel like I'm going to need to convince anyone in this audience of my ideas. So one of the things I'm attempting to do is give you analogies to take back when you discuss with faculty. So if they're sports fanatics, you can use the soccer team, football team, baseball team, whatever you want. If they're physics geeks, you can use the transfer function. If they're into sound, you can use the graphic equalizer analogy, right? How many people actually remember a graphic equalizer in the day of digital? Okay, a few people. For the rest of you, you can look it up. The graphic equalizer was, you didn't really like the input that was recorded on whatever sound media it was. You didn't think whoever recorded it got it exactly right, so you would get to use your graphic equalizer to adjust the amount of bass or treble or other frequencies to get the output you wanted. Now, one of the interesting things, okay, is that the output is the goal, right? We want successful science. It's obvious that you're going to have to change the knobs on your graphic equalizer. That's why they're movable, okay? You don't fix them and then like glue them in place. Depending on your input source, you would change them because you're going for a particular kind of output. And this is the other subtle point and why I like the graphic equalizer analogy when I came up with it. There are always these unintended frequencies U.S. Marines, they were evaluating their criteria, and it's certainly pretty obvious that if as a Marine you have to carry a certain amount of weight because you're going to carry your equipment around. And that stayed true. They left that in. Obviously, if you can't carry the equipment, you can't carry the equipment. They also had another requirement, which was you had to do a certain number of pull-ups. Again, seems like a pretty neutral requirement, achieving the goal you want, which is a certain amount of strength in your arms. The difference and the problem with that apparently neutral goal was the unintended consequences. Men and women on average have a different center of gravity, so you're measuring something different by asking them to do 20 pull-ups. What looks like the same criteria has an additional feature that isn't part of what you're trying to select for in reality. And so it's not shape is, different colors. And right now, what we do in academics is we apply the same transfer function to all of them. Now, we've been creating different support structures around that transfer function. We've been creating different recruiting and active recruiting, intensive advising, all of which are good, and none of which I'm recommending we get rid of. All I'm simply saying is the bulk of the time is in the classroom, and if they all are getting that same transfer function in the classroom, what are we doing about the output? Is it really what we want to get? And like I said, evidence suggests we're not changing. Just quickly, a few quick slides from the American Institute for Physics. This was the proportion of females among US high school students. And it's a good, it was mentioned in the last talk, some positive news. It's close to 50%, but it's pretty darn flat, and it's been that way since the late 80s, and yet percentage of women in grad school is still only 20%. And this is why I like to focus on the undergraduate years. These two numbers should match, okay? And they don't, and they haven't changed despite us doing stuff that we think will make them change. The one place I feel we haven't really attacked yet is in the classroom. And so we might as well try something we haven't tried yet. This is some data just from UCI. These are, I know they're a little hard to read, but basically it's a classic what we call ribbon tool. So on the left are physics majors as first-year students. And of course, 100% of them are still physics majors because they haven't done anything. Each of the dark yellow bars are 1 year later, and blue means they've graduated, gray means they've left the university. Okay, the top left curve is women in physics, starting about 2008 through 2012. Sad to say that number was 35. There's actually good news at UCI. If I do that for the last 2 years, so that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of students. If I do it for the last 2 years, we've changed our admission policies. It's also over 30. So for 2 years, we had over 30 women, where it took 5 years in the past. So we're doing some things right. The bottom curve is the men, and you can see that graduation gap, 17% versus 30%. The fascinating thing to me is where they go. When men leave physics at UCI, almost 20% of them switch to engineering. When women leave physics, they leave STEM completely. Okay? So it's not just looking at data in terms of when people leave and how they leave, it's where they're going when they leave matters as well. And you have to ask questions about that. So what are some of the elements of the current transfer function, and what might we do to change them? And I'm going to point out 4. One is choice of pedagogy, how we teach in the classroom. One is a little different, our course policies. I'm separating how we teach, what we're doing, and the rules we make in our classroom. How we assess, okay, what's going on, and the context of which this is occurring. So what do I mean by these? So pedagogy. The standard method in teaching in STEM is basically lecture, homework, and tests. Now, this makes a lot of sense. I'm talking in the physics context, but it applies elsewhere, okay? I had a senior colleague of mine once point out correctly that this is obviously the way to learn physics. You go to a lecture and you hear about what it is you're supposed to know. You go home, you struggle with the material, you go over your notes, you talk to friends about it, then you attack the problem sets, you work on those. When you get stuck, you work in groups, and then you go in and you take the test. Great. I said, what about the 80% of our students that don't know that's how you're supposed to learn? Right? They don't understand that that's the system and what's expected of them. That is where active learning comes in. There's years and years of evidence for why that active learning is better. I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, why is it better? And what really struck me that one moment when I was having a conversation with my senior colleague was what he just described that he did to learn physics is what active learning does in the classroom. It's that simple, right? It's not like active learning is anything special, magical, or radically different. It's simply saying to a faculty member, the way you learned, the way you expect your students to learn, you might need to teach them that. And the way you teach them that is you model it in the classroom first. And so if you look at most active learning techniques, that's what you're doing. And when you look at the results, it's not a little surprising that there's a differential positive impact from active learning on groups that are traditionally underrepresented in physics, because they're the groups that traditionally, on average, weren't understanding the rules of the game on how to learn. Your grading policy. There's growing evidence that curves cause problems, and they cause differential outcomes in the grades. And one of the reasons is it can trigger, from what the research shows, the imposter syndrome. But there's also this other interesting feature, I think, that needs to be studied. We know there's implicit bias in hiring, right? That was talked about earlier today, and there's lots of studies on that. Think about, in physics, the standard model of grades, right? My course policy, and this will come back to assessment a little bit, is to make an exam where basically everybody, the mean is 50%. Why? Because I'm a physicist and I'm into resolution. And if the mean is 50%, I have the full resolution of the scale to use. And I can really find out if someone in my class is the next Albert Einstein. That's my goal. Okay? What that means is students who have spent 12 years of their life learning that a 50% is absolute miserable failure and you have no business doing that, now get a 50% and you try and convince them it's a B. That just can't happen in 1 year for humans. They've had it too ingrained that a 50% is horrible. So unless you have another sort of cultural support to fall back on, you're going to run into trouble with the grading policy. Another fun one in physics, this goes to the cultural context a little bit in our policies. We love to claim that we're all about testing if people can do problems they've not seen before, often without teaching them how to do problems that have not been seen before, okay, which is a clever ploy. And I claim this is a lot about selection versus educating. We're very fearful in the STEM that somebody might slip through a 4-year undergraduate degree, get into a grad school, and then be bad. Think about that for a moment. Think about your colleagues, think about yourself. Our undergraduate curriculum and rules tend to be designed to make sure that anyone who accidentally gets admitted into a grad school doesn't make us look bad. That's really underlying some of the culture. Instead of being about doing our best to give everybody an opportunity to learn physics as well as they can, and then let grad schools worry about selecting the people they need in grad school and worry about it at the next stage. And this is my new favorite one that I just noticed and come up with. Talk about what, this is a pull-up example in physics. I would challenge people in physics and think in your own career, in your own area, if you're not in physics, there's probably an equivalent. To find a place in the undergraduate degree where the testing and grade and determination is not based almost entirely on whether you are good at calculations. We think about what I said earlier. We give exams where the mean is an attempt at 50%. This happens by giving problems that no one can solve all the way through. The problem is almost all calculations and heavy calculations. And now we're back to a position where we have to figure out how to give partial credit to them because they haven't gotten it all right. And now we're in that whole job application business full of implicit bias. If there's implicit bias in reading a resume, how much more implicit bias is there likely to be in judging a problem that people haven't gotten right? And judging how right or wrong it is. So inherent in the very system of how we do things. And now go back to the pull-up example. How many modern physicists spend their day calculating by hand? Right? That is not what I would argue is the key competency for a physicist. Okay? So the key competencies for physicists are not the things that are the key things we're testing at the undergraduate level. And we have to face that reality and rethink it. One of the analogies I gave, now that I'm an administrator, I think about way too many things. And people were talking to me about stuff, and I was actually asking students what was unfair about the way we graded them. And I had one student tell me they just wanted to learn, this was a bio student, they were interested in going to med school, they just wanted to learn the material. They wanted to be able to work in groups, however it took them to learn it, and all of their friends were highly competitive and wouldn't share and work together. And I said, wow, no wonder why the healthcare system in the US is in such trouble. The number one characteristic for becoming a doctor is that you are highly competitive. That is it. And I challenge you to list your top 5 criteria for a doctor. I'm willing to bet nobody in this room would put highly competitive in the top 5, probably not even in the top 10. And yet that's what the system is designed for selection. So physics is more than just calculation. So what are some things I think that might be nice to do next? First of all, I think the data strongly suggests that the process is a significant part of the problem. And also strongly suggests, if we think about it right, the process is not part of our goals. So I fully empathize, we don't want to lower our standards. That's never what this is about. It's broadening our standards. Okay? It's making a full soccer team, not just people who are strikers who can score, not just goalies, not just defenders. So you can maintain an incredibly high level of standard and rigor while maintaining processes that allow for diversity in the broadest sense. I think there's growing data that changing the pedagogy. I shouldn't even put growing data. The data's been there forever. This was a wimpy point. It's just ridiculous that we don't change how we teach. The data is there. And when you think about it, as I said, the mechanism of why we should change also makes sense. We should be partly about teaching people how to do these things. That's what we claim. What's interesting to me about most of my colleagues is when asked in the abstract, the number one thing they'll say is, well, I'm just here to teach them how to learn. Right? That's my main goal. If I can teach them how to learn, that's great. When you ask them to actually add teaching how to learn into their class and maybe removing 1 or 2 items of content, they're like, nope. I got to cover all the content. I cannot remove content in the name of teaching people how to learn, even though that's my main goal. And that's the conundrum we face in academics. How to have that conversation in an open way so that everyone's listening, though, is another challenge altogether. We have to evaluate the current processes and really ask, what are the key questions? What are the things we're trying to get at? Just a couple quick examples from UCI that I wanted to point out. One of the beauties of being the Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning is I get to actually give people lots of data. And we've started this year We have a whole bunch of data systems for our academic advisors, but faculty are going to get 3 things by the end of the year: a demographic report for their classes, a grade distribution report, and then a grade distribution report that connects one class to another. Faculty are actually going to have, in the demographic data, this is an old picture. You have first gen, low income, international transfer, campus-wide honors. Below each of those is a link to the Division of Teaching Excellence website as to what you might do differently or why you might worry in your teaching about having these different groups in your class. We show what majors they are, and there's an academic tab where you learn about their performance in past courses. Have they completed writing? Have they completed other key courses they want? The grade distribution reports are really to show the faculty that there are differences in the grade distribution by gender, by race, by income status. I don't think faculty are aware that in their courses these differences exist. What to do about it is a completely different question, but until you see the data that the difference is there, you're not going to know that you need to act at all. And finally, we're going to provide departmental reports, because at the end of the day, this is not about individual faculty in their classroom. It has to be about a department really embracing student success as the department's mission as a whole and understanding everything that's happening across the department. So we're going to give performance outcomes in key classes. We're going to let the departments pick a little bit what data they want. I should be clear, none of this is identified data. So you don't know anything about individual students. This is all in the aggregate. I also wanted to highlight you can get positive impacts and changes when you have data and you have other tools. People have mentioned money. At UCI, I'm very proud that my counterpart in academic personnel recently changed the rules and has really put teeth behind the idea that we do research, teaching, and service, and you need extra evidence of your teaching quality for any promotion or merit. That has had a huge impact in the culture. If nothing else, it's made people ask my office, okay, how do I prove that I'm teaching well, which is great. We also have if you're looking for about, a $60 million solution to the problem, build a new building. We built a new building with all new active learning classrooms, and to get priority scheduling, you need to be active learning certified. So at the end of 2 years of having this program, we'll have close to 200 faculty out of a little over 1,000 faculty certified, which is a huge jump forward. And even better, we're going to continue to assess them. If they don't actually use active learning, they will lose their priority for scheduling. And so faculty are very motivated by that. We've added learning assistants, which are undergraduates who are a member of that whole instructional team of faculty, grad students, and undergraduates. That team approach is very strong. And basically, I'm getting departments. The first year, we actually supported it with money out of my office. Then I told them I ran out of money, but they loved it so much, deans are actually now paying for it. So you addict people to things, and then good things happen. Though I was told I shouldn't refer it to addicting people to things, but I don't know what other word to replace it with. Yeah. I think one of the great other...
Coming up to 5 minutes if you want to leave any time
5
for
minutes,
questions.
Okay. This is my last point then, and then we'll do questions. This is an amazing thing data can tell you. I know 15 courses in the fall of the first year covers 93% of our students. We have leveraged those faculty. They've agreed to do things. I can now implement things in those classes that impact student success, and it's completely scalable. That doesn't cost the university any money. Those faculty are already being paid. And that's the other piece of this is, I meant to highlight AAU, but I'm going to skip through them. The other piece I just want to mention is that if we actually leverage faculty in the classroom, that's one of the only truly cost-effective ways to do this. Anything outside the classroom that's a new program is a challenge to scale. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, that's all needed. But you already pay your faculty to teach. They already have to teach. Students already go to class. If we can change that culture for free, we get to change everything that's going on. And as an administrator, we like the word free. Now, there's a small startup cost, but startup costs, you can always pay one-time startup costs. So thank you for your time, and I hope I left a few minutes for questions.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay.
Hi, I'm Kristen Leash from Women's Work Institute. I really appreciate your approach in discussing kind of the pedagogical opportunities here to make change in the classroom, and I'm just wondering in what ways your program might be addressing or equipping teachers to look at not just how they're teaching more active learning styles, but the content they're delivering and how they're delivering that. In other words, when there is the opportunity to point to female researchers and research papers, or to even in the way they deliver analogies in the classroom, considering the diversity of their constituents and their students, is the analogy that comes quickly to me, perhaps a sports analogy,
right.
I'll give you that, right? Is that going to be just as accessible, or is this going to compound the implicit biases that is perhaps preventing some people from feeling they belong in that space?
Do you want to take a few and then I'll answer more? Yep, that's fine.
Or do you want to do, because there's not much time.
Yeah.
Maybe back there.
Hi, Klaartje Vinkenburg, representing Porsche. I just tweeted your alternative metaphor for the leaky pipeline, which is a transfer function, which I'm in awe of, and I have to think through what it means. But I'm thinking, and the question that I have for you, I don't know if you're familiar with the paradox of meritocracy, how people tend to think that the best will flow to the top automatically.
Right.
But that's a paradox, because the more you believe in it, the less it will actually happen.
Right.
So I wonder how that holds against the metaphor of the transfer function.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
One more?
One more? Yeah.
Just here to the, you're right.
Hello, my name is Rochelle Smith. I'm from Washington University in St. Louis in the US. I am co-chair of our Standing Committee for Inclusive Classrooms there, and we work a lot with our teaching center. And one of the things that we've worked on over the past couple of years have been products that have come out of this committee to help faculty in the classrooms, and to my colleague here, who references not only how they're teaching, but what they're teaching and how do the students that they're teaching feel about what they're teaching. And also, we address in some of our products, and such as letters and things they can put on syllabi around, I don't like to use this word, but for lack of a better word, triggers for students, students of color, women, students from certain backgrounds. So if you have any of those products that are coming out for your faculty, I'd love to hear about them.
Great. Yeah, I'll take the first and last first and then go to the transfer function. You are both exactly right that I hope I obviously didn't quite make as clear as I wanted to. Pedagogy is only the bare starting point, right? This is about culture in the classroom. And faculty, particularly in STEM, where we think our material is neutral, we have to realize it's not. We have to realize culture is critical. I'm going to actually go and steal your products probably. We don't have a lot yet. We did successfully have a workshop last year, race and culture in the STEM classroom. And my staff was very nervous about me putting all of that in the title. I'm like, no, we have to acknowledge that there is race and culture issues in the STEM classroom. And we had over 30 faculty attend. I almost fainted. I don't know where they all came from. And so that's a key point. It has to be the whole package, and faculty have to understand that whole package. And that's kind of why I like the transfer function analogy, is I think it gets a little bit at this meritocracy issue from this direction. I'll see if this makes sense. One of the things I realized in talking to people is the problem it's probably across the whole academic area. In academics, those of us who made it feel like we made it because there was a meritocracy and we earned our way there. Right, unconsciously or consciously. We had to jump through a lot of hoops, we had to do a lot of stuff, and we came out on top, okay? But that was because we ran through a particular set of pipes and hoops. What I like about a transfer function analogy is it's not just about getting through things, it's about helping people through things. And it's the difference, I've often heard the difference between a filter and a pump. A lot of the systems we as faculty have set up are filters. We select for people of a particular quality or characteristic instead of getting people to a particular level of expertise and competency. And so for me, when I think of a transfer function, it's about transformation. It's about transforming, and not in just one set way and not just into one particular mold. It's about helping people move from point A to point B in a very intentional and productive way. And that's critical to me, and that includes that culture element. You have to understand what's going to keep people out, what's going to help move people forward, and that it really is about this sort of abstract ideal of educating and creating scientists, but that scientist is a broad term, and within that there's lots of different ways to be, and lots of different ways to be a scientist. And so that's the critical piece for me. So I think that kind of goes to all the questions, but thank you.
Fantastic, yeah. If there are more questions, thanks so much.
Thank you
if there
so
are more
much.
questions, we're networking in 30 minutes. So please